forest isn't a sanctuary. It's a vault. Its boughs a lattice ceiling and secrets too immense, too alive to be tamed. My name is Samuel Hayo, and in 2013, I stood atop a fire tower in New Mexico's Gila National Forest, a solitary speck against a wilderness that pulsed with quiet malice. I'd sought solitude to mend a fractured life, a divorce that hollowed me, a drinking habit that nearly claimed me, only to find a fracture deeper still, one that split the earth and my mind alike. This isn't just my descent. It's a litany of voices, each raw and trembling with the weight of what they've glimpsed, woven together by the terror that festers in America's wild places. Welcome to the forbidden excavation, where we pry open the earth's dark seams and face the eyes that stare back. I was 36 then, a man unmoored, trading the clamor of Albuquerque's streets for the stark isolation of a tower near Malin Baldy, a jagged peak in the Gila's vast expanse of deep canyons, sheer cliffs, and ancient, wind-twisted pines. The job was a lifeline, a tether to something solid. Watch for smoke, report it, endure the silence that stretched like a taut wire. No cell signal pierced the forest shroud, no Wi-Fi tethered me to the world beyond. Just a landline for emergencies, its static a constant murmur, and a .45 pistol, its grip worn smooth, once used to end a rattlesnake's hiss my first week on duty. Supplies arrived monthly, airdropped in battered crates that thudded onto the rocky clearing below. The Forest Service's trucks too frail for the rutted, root-choked roads that snaked through the wilderness. For months, it was me and the tower, a weathered skeleton of wood and steel, its beams groaning under the wind's relentless pressure, a sound that shifted from a banshee's wail on stormy nights to a low, mournful hum when the air stilled. I'd craved peace, and for a time, I found it. Until that Wednesday in late summer when the horizon darkened with smoke. It crept in slow, a faint gray thread northwest of my post, threading through the pines like a whisper of ruin. I leaned against the tower's railing, the metal cold through my jacket, and pressed binoculars to my face, tracing its source. A smudge against the endless green. Barely a threat, a wisp I'd seen a dozen times before. I radioed the ranger station, voice steady despite the prickle on my neck. Tower 4, smoke sighted, northwest quadrant, low intensity, coordinates logged. I expected the usual reply, "We'll send a crew, good catch, Sam." But the voice that crackled back was sharp, clipped, devoid of warmth. "Roger that, Tower 4. Stay put." No chatter, no reassurance. Just static buzzing like a swarm of flies trapped in the receiver. Odd, but not yet a claw in my gut. I marked the time, 11:47 a.m., and returned to my watch, the binoculars await in my hands. By afternoon, the smoke had thickened, rising into a gray column that stood stark against the sky's pale blue. I adjusted my lenses, peering through the haze. Flames flickered at its base, orange tongues licking the pines, turning them into blackened husks, their needles curling to ash. The forest scarred itself in patches, a slow, deliberate burn that gnawed at my understanding. No lightning had split the sky in weeks, its absence a dry ache in the air. No campers roamed that restricted sector, their permits denied. No prescribed burns were slated, the schedule clear as the day I checked it. It didn't add up. Fires don't ignite from nothing, not here, not like this. I radioed again, urgency creeping in. Tower 4, fires growing, northwest sector, visible flames. Need confirmation on response. Silence answered, the static a hiss that coiled tighter. I tried the landline next, its ring echoing into a void. No pickup, no hum of connection, just an empty whine. Anxiety clawed up my spine, 1,000 tiny legs skittering beneath my skin. That night, I stayed awake, the fire's distant glow a malevolent eye piercing the dark. I paced the tower's narrow cabin, 10 feet by 10, its walls lined with faded maps, its floor scuffed by years of boots. Coffee gone cold in a chipped mug, the lantern's flicker casting shadows that danced like specters. The fire moved wrong. Not wild and chaotic, spreading with the wind's whim, but deliberate, carving patterns into the forest. Arcs that bent like ribs, lines that slashed like veins, a geometry of destruction I couldn't unsee. I told myself it was exhaustion, the isolation's trick. Too much coffee, too little sleep, the mind weaving shapes from chaos. But the glow pulsed, steady and alive, and my hands trembled as I gripped the railing, the metal biting into my palms. Dawn broke with a radio burst, faint through the static. Tower 4, teams en route. Stay at your post. Same monotone voice, no name, no comfort. Just a command that sank into me like a stone. My gut twisted tighter, a knot I couldn't loosen. Mid-morning brought movement below. 2 figures emerging from the trees, hiking the dirt path toward my tower. They wore fire-resistant gear. Yellow jackets patched with wear, heavy pants stained with mud, but carried no helmets, no radios, no tools of the trade, just backpacks slung low over their shoulders. Their stride was too deliberate, too sure for the uneven terrain, boots kicking up dust that hung in the still air. I stepped onto the deck, the wood creaking beneath me, and peered down, squinting against the sun. "You the lookout?" the shorter one called. His voice rough as gravel, face tanned and creased like old leather, etched with lines that spoke of sun and strain. His smile didn't reach his eyes. A hollow crescent, more threat than greeting. "That's me," I said, voice steady but wary, fingers brushing the pistol at my hip. "You from the station?" "Not exactly," the taller one replied, his tone smooth, practiced, like oil sliding over glass, his face shadowed under a hood. "Contractors, here to assess the situation." Contractors? In 8 years with the Forest Service, I'd never heard of outsourcing fire response. Not in a wilderness this remote, this unforgiving. Suspicion flared, sharp and hot, an ember in my chest. "Got credentials?" I asked, keeping it light, casual, though my pulse quickened. The short one waved a hand, dismissive, his fingers calloused and stained. "No need to worry. We've got it under control. Stay here." Their words landed like a command, not a request, heavy with unspoken weight. I nodded, feigning ease, but as they turned away, I grabbed my binoculars, the lenses fogged with my breath. I tracked them as they moved, not toward the fire's smoldering edge, but toward a restricted zone. A swath of forest marked off on my maps with red ink, assumed to be old mining claims or unstable ground, a place I'd never ventured. By late afternoon, they'd melted into the trees, swallowed by the green, their yellow jackets flickering like ghosts before vanishing. Fear bloomed, a cold weight pressing my ribs, urging me to act, drive to the station, hike out, do something. My truck sat below, a rusting hulk with a temperamental engine. Abandoning post meant my job, my fragile anchor. I stayed, eyes burning as I watched the restricted zone until dusk painted the sky blood red. Sunset changed everything. They reappeared, emerging from the forest's edge, the taller one hauling something over his shoulder. A shape too angular, too limp to be gear. I focused my lenses, breath catching in my throat. It was a man, or what had been one. Head lolling at an impossible angle, neck twisted beyond breaking, chest a shredded mess of red and white, ribs gleaming through torn flesh, blood dripping in dark rivulets down the contractor's arm. My stomach lurched while rising. The binoculars clattered to the deck, the sound sharp in the stillness. I snatched my pistol, its weight cold and grounding, and crept down the tower stairs, each step a creak that echoed in my skull, heart hammering so loud I feared they'd hear it. They reached a pickup truck parked on a dirt track that shouldn't exist. No markings, no plates, just a plume of dust as they peeled away into the twilight. Logic screamed retreat. Radio again, hike out, call for help, but something primal, reckless, pulled me toward the restricted zone. 2 miles through tangled underbrush, branches snapping underfoot like brittle bones, the air growing thick with the scent of pine and something sour. The restricted zone opened into a scorched clearing. The earth blackened to ash, cracked and lifeless, the air heavy with burnt chemicals and a rot so deep it stung my eyes. A metal hatch jutted from the ground, half buried under debris, twisted roots, shattered rock. Its edges rusted but deliberate, man-made. The padlock was old, brittle, its surface pitted with corrosion. One stomp with my boot shattered it, the clang swallowed by the forest's hush. The hatch groaned open, hinges screaming, exhaling a damp, fetid breath that coated my throat. A ladder plunged into darkness, its rungs slick with condensation, disappearing into a void I couldn't measure. I told myself I'd just look. A quick peek, nothing more. Curiosity's cruel hook sinking deep, overriding the fear that clawed at my gut. I clipped the flashlight to my belt, pistol in one hand, and descended, the cold metal biting my palms. Each step a descent into a silence that pressed against my eardrums. The ladder ended in a concrete corridor, its walls streaked with dark, oily stains that glistened under flickering fluorescence, the bulbs buzzing faintly, casting jagged shadows that shifted with every step. The air grew frigid, decay so thick it coated my tongue, a taste of metal and rot that made my stomach churn. The corridor stretched ahead, narrow and claustrophobic, its ceiling low enough to brush my hair, forcing a hunch to my shoulders. The first room I reached was a lab, tables strewn with vials of murky fluid, jars sealed with yellowed labels, surgical tools glinting under the lights. Scalpels, forceps, a bone saw crusted with something dark. A metal table dominated the corner, its surface pitted and stained, restraints bolted to its edges. Leather straps cracked and curled, crusted with dried blood, brown turned nearly black, the air above it thick with the ghost of screams I couldn't hear but felt in my bones. I pushed deeper, legs trembling, the flashlight's beam darting across the walls, catching glints of moisture or worse. A storage room opened ahead, its door ajar, metal barrels lining the walls like sentinels, their surfaces etched with cryptic codes, letters and numbers in a sequence I couldn't parse, faded but deliberate. I pried one open, the lid screeching against rusted hinges, and the stench hit. A wave of rot so fierce I gagged, while burning my throat, my flashlight clattering to the floor. Inside, body parts, human, floated in viscous yellow muck. Arms severed at the elbow, legs hacked at the knee, torsos split open, organs spilling like grotesque fruit, all preserved in a slurry that shimmered faintly under the light. A hand bobbed near the surface, fingers curled as if reaching for me, nails torn and bloody. I stumbled back, choking, the barrel's edge biting my palm, leaving a red welt I barely felt through the nausea. Footsteps echoed, heavy, deliberate, not my own, reverberating down the corridor like a drumbeat of doom. I ducked behind a stack of barrels, breath shallow, the cold concrete pressing against my back, pistol trembling in my grip. The shorter man appeared in the doorway, machete in hand, its blade smeared with dark gore that dripped onto the floor in slow, thick drops. His head tilted, sniffing the air like a hound, his leathery face shadowed under the flickering light, eyes glinting with a predator's focus. My heart pounded, a frantic rhythm against my ribs, as he lingered, then turned away, his boots scuffing the floor. I waited, lungs burning, until the sound faded, then bolted, up the ladder, rungs slipping under my sweat-slick hands, through the forest, branches clawing my face, lungs searing until I reached the tower, its silhouette a frail beacon in the dark. I barricaded the door with a chair, its legs scraping the floor, pistol shaking in my hands as I sat vigil through the night, the cabin's walls closing in, the lantern's glow a weak shield against the dark. Every creak of the tower, every rustle outside, was a threat. His footsteps, his blade, the bunker's stench seeping through the cracks. Dawn came quiet, the sky a pale wash of gray. The smoke vanished as if it had never been, the forest eerily still, its silence a mockery. The hatch remained below, a dark scar I couldn't unsee, its presence a weight on my chest. I packed my gear, jacket, binoculars, a few books, left a note on the radio log. Incident at restricted zone, resigning effective immediately, and hiked out, 2 days through dense woods and rocky trails, my boots caked with mud, my mind replaying the barrels, the body, the machete's gleam. In the nearest town, I reported everything to the authorities. Words tumbling out, raw and jagged, describing the fire, the men, the bunker, the horror beneath the hatch. They listened, nodded, promised an investigation, their faces blank masks of procedure. Weeks later, a call came, polite, dismissive, the Forest Service's voice smooth as the contractor's. "Thank you for your vigilance, Mr. Hayo. No evidence of wrongdoing. The area's restricted due to hazardous materials testing, chemical spills, old sites. You misread it, likely stress." I knew what I'd seen. Those barrels weren't spills, that body wasn't a mirage. Months later, a friend in the service, voice low over a crackling line, whispered the truth. Carlton Doofus, a biologist turned black market organ harvester, ran that bunker, the fire a calculated erasure of his tracks, the contractors his hands. He was never caught, his shadow slipping through the system's cracks. I left New Mexico, moved east, took a desk job, but the healer's weight clings. A shadow I carry, a taste of rot I can't rinse from my mouth, echoes from the towers, a tapestry of terror. My plunge was one thread in a shroud of dread, spun by others who faced the wild's unseen fangs across decades and distances. These aren't tales for campfires. They're wounds carved into flesh and psyche, testimonies from those who clawed free and silences from those who didn't. Below, their stories rise, each a shard of the same fractured mirror, reflecting the physical toll of survival, the unraveling of the mind under terror's gaze, and the existential dread of truths too vast to hold. Grant Calloway, The Hunter's Prey, Bitterroot National Forest, Montana, 2017. Grant Calloway was 34 in 2017, a man ground down by life's relentless churn. Divorce stripping him of home and hope, a tire shop job in Missoula numbing his days, nights lost to whiskey's blur. He took a fire lookout post in Montana's Bitterroot National Forest, atop Burnt Hollow, a ridge named for a fire decades past, its soil still dark with ash, its pines stunted and sparse. The tower was his refuge. A squat cabin perched on steel stilts, its windows smudged with years of dust and smoke, its interior a cramped cell of weathered wood. 10 feet square, a cot sagging in one corner, a desk littered with maps and coffee rings, a propane stove hissing faintly in the quiet. 3 months in, he'd carved a routine from the solitude. Coffee brewed at dawn, horizon scans with binoculars, paperback novels to fend off the boredom that gnawed at him, the occasional chitter of squirrels taunting from the rafters. The silence was a balm, a space to breathe where the world couldn't reach him. One midday, sunlight glinted off movement a mile down the slope, a flicker threading through the trees. He adjusted his binoculars, the lenses cold against his brow. A man, tall and lean, jacket tattered to muddy threads, a machete slung across his back, its blade catching the light in brief, sharp flashes. Not a hiker, no pack, no aimless wandering, just a steady stride weaving through the pines with purpose. Grant's pulse quickened, a dull thud in his ears. Hikers were rare here, the trails too rugged, too remote. Armed ones were anomalies that set his nerves alight. He grabbed the hand-crank radio, its handle stiff with disuse, and called base. Tower 27, lone male, armed with a machete, heading my way, miles southwest. Static hissed, then a faint reply. Copy that, Tower 27. Rangers 2 hours out. Hold tight. The words hung in the air, hollow. He set the radio down, hand drifting to the hatchet by the door. His only weapon, its blade dulled from chopping kindling, its heft a small comfort against the unknown. By late afternoon, the air thickened with the scent of pine resin and dust, and boots crunched gravel below, each step a deliberate crack in the stillness. Grant stepped onto the deck, wood creaking under his weight, and leaned over the railing, voice firm despite the tremor in his chest. "This is restricted territory. You lost." The man stopped, tilting his head up, his face gaunt beneath a scraggly beard, skin stretched tight over sharp bones, eyes unreadable, dark pools that swallowed the light. "Not lost," he rasped, voice dry as dead leaves, tapping the machete's flat against his palm with a rhythm that echoed in Grant's skull. "Looking for something." "Not here," Grant said, grip tightening on the railing. "Head back to the trail." The man grinned, a cold, crooked slash that made Grant's skin crawl, and started climbing the stairs, wood groaning under his weight. each step a slow, deliberate threat. Grant retreated, slamming the door, sliding the bolt with a clang that rang in his ears. He grabbed the radio again, cranking it furiously. Tower 27 to base, he's climbing, armed, requesting immediate assistance. Static, then copy. Closest Rangers 2 hours out. Hold tight. 2 hours, an eternity with a blade at his door. The man reached the landing, his silhouette filling the window, breath fogging the cracked glass. He stared, unblinking, then swung the machete. Once, cracking the pane, twice, shattering it inward, shards raining onto the floor like brittle hail. "Get out!" Grant shouted, hatchet raised, its edge catching the light. The man laughed, a dry, humorless sound that scraped against Grant's nerves, and stepped through, boots crunching glass, machete gleaming in his fist. What followed was a blur of terror and instinct. Machete slashing air, Grant sidestepping, the blade biting the table's edge, splintering wood. He swung the hatchet wild, missed, took a chair to the legs from a kick, went down hard, back slamming into the wall, breath punched from his lungs. The man loomed, machete poised. "You've had a good life. Shame it's ending." Grant kicked out, catching his knee, hearing a grunt as the man stumbled. Scrambling up, he swung again, burying the hatchet in the man's shoulder. Steel sinking deep, blood spraying hot across his arm, a guttural scream tearing from the man's throat, animalistic and raw. He staggered, clutching the wound, dark red seeping through his fingers. Grant bolted past, snatching the flare gun from its case by the door. He fired through the door frame. The flare exploded outward, a fiery streak that struck the wall, flames licking up the dry wood, catching fast. The man yelped, reeling back, the fire's glow painting his face in flickering orange as he fled down the stairs. Grant leapt out the shattered window, dropping 10 feet to the ground, pain jolting through his legs as he hit, rolling into a sprint. He collapsed by a creek bed half a mile out, chest heaving, watching the tower blaze. A pyre against the dusk, smoke curling into the sky like a signal he hadn't meant to send. Rangers arrived as night deepened, sirens wailing faint through the trees. Too late to catch the man, but they found his trace. A makeshift campsite a mile away, littered with bones. Some animal, some human. Piled in crude stacks, and journals scrawled with a predator's manifesto. Lars Mikkelsen, they named him later, a drifter with a history of violence, hunting men in the wild for a decade. He vanished, burned in the fire or fled into the forest's depths. The Bitterroot kept its silence. Grant quit the next day, the tower's ashes his farewell. The wild's quiet a lie he couldn't unhear, the weight of that scream echoing in his sleep. Avery Drayton. The Pursued, Tioga Scenic Area, Allegheny National Forest, Pennsylvania, 2013. Avery Drayton was 29 in 2013, a man weary of people's failures, friends who betrayed, lovers who faded, seeking solace in Pennsylvania's Allegheny National Forest. His post was an 80-foot tower in the Tioga Scenic Area, a creaky relic of wood and steel perched on a ridge overlooking miles of dense forest. Its planks weathered gray, its rungs rusted to a dull red. The cabin atop was sparse, a cot with a thin mattress, a propane stove spitting blue flame, a desk with binoculars and a radio that crackled only when the ranger station deigned to speak. 5 weeks in, he'd carved a rhythm from the solitude. Mornings scanning the horizon for smoke, afternoons logging wind shifts and cloud patterns, evenings with a battered paperback under a lantern's dim glow, the forest's hum a steady companion. The isolation was a shield, a space where disappointment couldn't follow, until one afternoon, movement shattered the stillness. It was 4 p.m., the forest floor a patchwork of shadows and sunlight filtering through the canopy. He adjusted his binoculars, lenses fogged with his breath. A man weaving north through the trees, wild-haired, clothes torn to rags, stumbling fast, arms flailing as if propelled by terror. Not a casual hike. Panic drove him, each step a lurch toward survival. Avery grabbed the radio, voice steady despite the prickle on his neck. "Ranger Station, this is Drayton, Tower 12. Got a guy in distress, 3 clicks north of my position. Looks rough. Anyone out there? A pause, static hissing, then, negative, Drayton. No teams in that area. Keep an eye on him. Report if he needs assistance. An hour later, the man reappeared, closer now at the tower's base, wild eyes darting back, then scanning the ridge as if seeking a landmark. Avery leaned over the railing, shouting down, "Hey, you all right?" The man jerked his head up, startled, mouth opening but no words coming, then bolted into the underbrush, swallowed by pine thickets, his ragged jacket a fleeting blur. 50 yards behind where he'd stood, 2 figures emerged. Bulky, clad in dark clothing too heavy for the warm day, moving with a predator's grace. One carried a rifle slung over his shoulder, its barrel glinting faintly. The other gripped something in his fist, a knife, maybe, or rope. Avery's heart thudded, a heavy beat against his ribs. He grabbed the radio again. Ranger station, situation escalating. 2 armed individuals moving north, tracking the runner. Need backup. The voice sharpened. Copy that, Drayton. Stay put, keep eyes on them. We'll alert local authorities. He followed them with binoculars, their forms flickering through the trees, deliberate and relentless, until they vanished into the green, the forest closing like a curtain. Dusk crept in, the woods falling silent. No crickets, no rustle of leaves, just an oppressive hush that pressed against the tower's walls, every creak of its frame a jolt to his nerves. At 8 p.m., as the last streaks of daylight bled away, a cry pierced the quiet. "Help! Please, help me!" Avery snatched his flashlight, its beams slicing the dark, and shone it down. The runner stood at the tower's base, waving frantic arms, face streaked with dirt and sweat, eyes wide with terror. "What's going on?" Avery shouted, voice echoing off the ridge. "Who's after you?" "They'll kill me," the man yelled, voice cracking. "Please, let me up." Every instinct screamed to stay out of it. The rifle by the desk, a rusty bolt action, felt pitiful against armed pursuers, but Avery lowered the ladder, its rungs clanging as it unfurled. The man scrambled up, fast and clumsy, nearly slipping, collapsing onto the platform in a heap, gasping. "They're not normal hunters. I saw them, cutting someone up." His name was Callum, a hiker who'd stumbled onto a nightmare near the river that morning, his hands trembling as he clutched the deck's edge, his story spilling in jagged bursts. Midnight brought the hunters, footsteps crunching below, deliberate and slow, 2 faint beams of flashlights bobbing through the trees. Callum froze, eyes darting to the platform's edge, whispering, "They're here." Avery killed the lantern, plunging the cabin into shadow, and peered out, gripping the rifle. The beams closed in, voices muffled but sharp, aggressive, rising from the base. "We know you're up there," a deep voice called, resonant and cold. "Come down, we'll make it quick." Avery hissed to Callum, "Stay quiet." Chambering around, the click loud in the stillness. The men started climbing, ladder rungs groaning. "Stop right there or I shoot," Avery shouted, aiming at the hatch. They paused, a tense beat. Then, "You don't want to get involved. Hand him over, we'll leave you be." Callum gripped Avery's arm, pleading, "Don't let them take me." Avery fired a warning shot into the air, the crack deafening, reverberating off the ridge. The men retreated, boots thudding down, but lingered below, shadows pacing in the dark. Dawn broke with a helicopter's roar, shattering the tension. Avery waved an orange flag from the deck, its fabric snapping in the wind, and within minutes, rangers and state troopers swarmed the area, rifles gleaming, voices barking orders. The men were caught hiding a mile off, armed with knives, rope, plastic sheeting, their packs heavy with intent. Near the river, a shallow grave held human remains. Callum's story confirmed in grim detail. They were poachers and organ traffickers, preying on the remote wild, their operation small but vicious. Avery quit the next week, the tower's solitude no longer a shield but a lure, the forest's hush a call he couldn't trust, Callum's trembling hands a ghost in his memory. Desmond Terrell. The thing below, Gila National Forest, New Mexico, 2011. Desmond Terrell was 41 in 2011, fleeing Denver's clamor, traffic, crowds, a failed marriage, for the Gila's quiet embrace. His tower stood above a sea of green, a weathered perch of wood and steel, its cabin a tight box, cot, stove, desk. Its windows framing a wilderness that stretched unbroken to the horizon. Routine anchored him. Coffee brewed over propane, horizon scans with binoculars, radio check-ins with a ranger station 20 miles out, the static a familiar hum. The forest's rhythm, birdsong, whined through pines, was a salve, black bears ambling below a rare intrusion he welcomed with a nod. He thought danger meant boredom or a stray lightning strike, until a wiry man in a faded red jacket passed beneath, rifle slung low, his stride cutting through the underbrush like a blade. Hours later, smoke rose, faint at first, a gray tendril curling north of the man's path, contained in a way that pricked Desmond's instincts. He radioed it in. Tower 9, smoke sighted, North Quadrant, small but steady. Base promised a team by morning, their voice distant through static. Dusk thickened the plume, its stillness eerie. No spread, no flicker of flame, just a steady exhale from the trees. Desmond watched it shift in the moonlight, growing denser but rooted, unnatural in its precision. Sleep eluded him, the tower's walls creaking as if straining under the night's weight. At midnight, curiosity, sharp, reckless, drove him down the ladder, flashlight clipped to his belt, notebook in one hand, a sheathed knife at his hip, the pistol left behind in a drawer he rarely opened. The trail was narrow, a deer path littered with fallen branches, his boots crunching dry soil, each sound magnified in the stillness. Twigs snapping, leaves rustling underfoot, his breath a faint plume in the chill. The air soured as he neared, acrid with burnt plastic and rotting meat, a stench that twisted his stomach. Half a mile out, a clearing opened, bathed in the flashlight's weak glow. A crude fire pit smoldered at its center, surrounded by bones. Not deer, not elk, but human. A skull atop the pile, jaw gaping mid-scream, eye sockets hollow and accusing. The red jacket lay crumpled nearby, smeared with dark stains, its fabric torn as if clawed apart. Desmond gagged, stumbled back, the beam darting wildly, catching glints of white ribs, femurs, a hand stripped to sinew. A wet slap sounded, meat dragged across stone, from the clearing's far edge. He swung the light. A creature stood, hunched but upright, its elongated limbs bent at angles that defied bone. Skin mottled gray and stretched tight over a frame too gaunt, too sharp. Its head was narrow, canine yet flat snout, tufts of gnarled fur sprouting from a skull that gleamed under the beam, eyes glinting like wet coal. The stench hit harder, wrought alive and concentrated, buckling his knees. It tilted its head, sniffing with shallow, jerking motions, then dropped to all fours, claws digging soil, circling the fire pit with a predator's grace. Desmond froze, breath caught, every muscle screaming flight, but his legs locked. It sniffed again, head snapping toward him, and charged, silent but for the crash of undergrowth, its speed a blur of gray and claws. Desmond ran, flashlight bobbing, branches clawing his arms, legs, tearing his jacket. The creature's pursuit a relentless thunder, its wheeze a nightmare's breath rasping inches behind. He reached the tower, scrambling up the ladder, skipping rungs, hands slipping on cold steel, slamming the hatch shut, bolting it with a clang that echoed in his skull. It climbed, claws raking the supports, metal groaning, the tower shaking as if it might collapse. Desmond grabbed the radio, shouting, "Help! Something's attacking!" Static, then Manuel's voice, faint, "Hold tight, backup's coming." The hatch splintered as it burst through, jaws snapping inches from his face, teeth jagged and yellowed, saliva dripping in thick strands. Desmond slashed with the knife, blade sinking into its forearm, black ichor oozing, a hiss scream tearing from its throat. It recoiled. He grabbed the fire extinguisher, pulled the pin, unleashed a cloud of foam into its face, blinding it, choking it. The creature thrashed, claws raking its own head, and Desmond shoved it toward the hatch, its body tumbling down the ladder with a sickening thud. Silence followed, broken only by his gasping breaths. Rangers arrived 10 minutes later, finding no creature, just bones, the fire pit, ichor staining the ground. They returned at daylight. The clearing was scattered, bones dispersed, the stench a lingering ghost. Desmond resigned, the Gila's betrayal a wound he couldn't close. The creature's eyes burned into his dreams. Edward Calloway, Devil's Claw, Ouachita National Forest, Arkansas, 2011. Edward Calloway was 38 in 2011, escaping a divorce that left him with nothing: house, dog, friends gone, to the Ouachita National Forest in Arkansas. His tower was a creaky outpost deep in the wild, its rust-edged ladder swaying in the wind, its cabin a tight box of cot, radio, and a desk with an outdated map yellowed at the edges. The forest was dense, green, humming with life, cicadas droning, birds flitting through the canopy. A balm for a man seeking a fresh start. Routine settled him. Coffee sipped at dawn, horizon scans logging smoke or storms, the isolation a quiet he'd grown to crave, talking to himself to fill the void when the silence pressed too hard. One morning, binoculars caught something odd 2 miles northwest, near Devil's Claw, a cluster of boulders locals shunned, their surfaces etched with jagged marks folktales blamed on spirits. A shape moved, huge, bigger than a bear, walking upright, its gait loping, fluid. Wrong. Edward radioed Ranger Jeff Willis. Tower 5, movement near Devil's Claw. Not human, not bear. Jeff's voice, tinged with disinterest. Probably a black bear. Keep watch. Edward argued, but Jeff tuned out. By mid-afternoon, boredom and curiosity, reckless twins, drove him out, packing a flashlight, first aid kit, and his grandfather's old revolver, its weight reassuring despite years of disuse, strapped beneath his jacket. The trail to Devil's Claw was overgrown, a narrow path winding through dense trees and jagged rocks, the air heavy with damp earth and pine needles, light filtering green through the canopy. Silence deepened as he walked. No insects, no birds, just his boots crunching gravel, his breath a steady rhythm. Near the boulders, a metallic tang hit, blood mixed with rot, sharp and nauseating. A deer carcass lay torn open, ribs protruding like broken sticks, head gone. The kill chaotic, deliberate, savored. Footprints led off, large, misshapen, clawed at the toes, too big for man or beast. He followed, heart pounding, revolver drawn, the trail marked by more death. A raccoon mutilated, ground clawed up, the stench unbearable. A guttural noise froze him, low, primal, close. From the shadows, a creature emerged, hunched, broad-shouldered, covered in patchy, matted fur, its face elongated, canine yet twisted, jaws wide with jagged teeth, hands ending in claws that gleamed wetly. It sniffed, scanning with jerky movements, a hyena warped by nightmare. Edward backed away, slow, silent, but a twig snapped, the sound deafening. Its head whipped around, locking eyes and charged. No roar, just a deep rumble that tightened his chest. He ran, branches clawing his face, lungs burning, revolver firing blindly over his shoulder, shots echoing uselessly. He tripped in a clearing, wind knocked out, the creature closing, savoring, until a flare cracked the sky, red light bathing the scene, driving it back with a snarl. Rangers Jeff and Paul arrived, shotguns drawn, having seen Edward's flare from a patrol. They fled to the tower, barricading it, radioing backup. Hours later, fish and wildlife combed Devil's Claw. No creature, just mutilated animals, footprint casts, samples they wouldn't explain. Edward transferred a week later, the official report citing a bear, but Jeff's note on a photo, "Stay safe, watch your back," hinted at doubt. Edward kept the folder. Casts, kills. Staring at it late nights, the creature's claws a scar on his soul, the forest's peace a shattered illusion. Silas Dorn. The bone pile, Wasatch National Forest, Utah, 1986. Silas Dorn was 27 in 1986. A summer fire lookout in Utah's Wasatch National Forest. Escaping a mess in Spokane, debts, broken ties, for solitude and a paycheck. His tower perched on a ridge, surrounded by old-growth forest. A weather-beaten cabin atop a narrow dirt road 10 miles from the ranger station. Its walls drafty, its windows rattling in the wind. The first weeks were uneventful, mornings scanning the horizon, afternoons scribbling bad poetry, nights peaceful but dark, a blackness so deep it made him hesitate to step outside. The forest's quiet was a comfort, a chance to fade from the world, until a month in, when the trees bent wrong. In a valley below, where a creek cut through, the pines twisted, spiraled like corkscrews, bark stripped in jagged strips, a patch that defied wind or storm. Silas radioed Ranger Larry. "Tower 3, odd damage in the valley. Mudslide, maybe?" Larry laughed. "Wind damage. You'll see worse." That night, half asleep on the cot, a thumping woke him, low, rhythmic, like a sledgehammer on the forest floor, faint but steady, from the bent trees. He sat up, listening, the sound a pulse in the dark, dismissing it as a woodpecker or elk, forcing sleep. Morning gnawed at him, the trees, the thump, a pull he couldn't shake. Binoculars revealed a trail, broken branches, trampled undergrowth, leading deeper. By afternoon, he hiked down. Flashlight, hunting knife, canteen, curiosity outweighing caution. Up close, the trees were grotesque. Trunks spiraled, bark clawed off, ground littered with splinters and fir clumps. A sharp, earthy smell laced with metal. The trail thickened, trees crowding tighter, air heavy, sounds amplified, boots crunching, leaves rustling, a distant bird's call fading. Half a mile in, a clearing opened. A massive pile of bones, bleached white, heaped like a grotesque shrine. Deer, elk, bear, and a human skull, jaw open in a silent scream. Silas backed away, heart hammering, when movement flickered. At the clearing's edge, a thing stepped into view, 8 feet tall, covered in coarse, matted fur, limbs long and twisted, joints bending wrong, face almost human but distorted, nose flattened, mouth stretched with jagged teeth. It saw him. They stared, a frozen beat. Then it roared, deep and guttural, skin crawling. Silas ran, crashing through undergrowth, branches tearing his skin. The creature's footsteps a thunder behind, fast and heavy. He reached the tower, slammed the door, bolted it, chest heaving, radioing Larry. "Something's out there, huge, not human." A pause, then, "Stay in, I'll send help." Morning brought no one, radio static, no response. Night fell, the thumping returned, closer, trees swaying below. It climbed, claws gripping the window frame, face pressing the glass, a grotesque grin. Silas slashed with the knife, then swung a fire axe into its shoulder as it burst in, blood spraying dark. It charged again. He fired a flare into its chest, for igniting, the cabin catching. He shoved it out, flames spreading, and climbed down as the tower blazed. Rangers found bones, a charred husk, called it a bear. Silas quit, the thumping a heartbeat he can't silence. The unseen beneath the canopy. These voices don't resolve. They linger, a stain across America's wildlands. From the Gila's canyons to the Bitterroots ridges, from Allegheny's shadows to the Wasatch's peaks. The forest hides more than trees. Creatures defying flesh and reason. Men turned feral by isolation or intent. Secrets sealed in earth and silence. Official reports weave lies. Bears, accidents, but the witnesses bear the truth. Something ancient, ravenous, watches. What binds them? The tower's solitude, yes. A vigil that invites the wild's gaze. But the land itself is alive, its roots drinking from a well of primal dread. Folklore offers Wendigos, skinwalkers, names too small, too human for these horrors. Government shadows, restricted zones, denials, hint at experiments or buried sins. Carlton Doofus, a thread in a larger web. Or perhaps the wild simply rejects us, It's intruders with claws and fire.